right, can you hear me? All right. Thanks, Luis. That's, yeah, as Sam said, you can come and introduce me anytime. That was fantastic. And just before I get started, I just want to say thanks to Sam. I really enjoyed that. I think your passion, your dedication, your energy, and what you bring to Stella and to this room, I think, is absolutely fantastic, and it's infectious. And I can tell some of our team already started looking at the code behind what British Bulldog insurance would look like. So we'll sort of start to work through some of that. But in terms of doing what you love, we're about to sort of host a panel on topic of geospatial technology, right, and its application to the insurance industry and the potential for that. And the two speakers who will be joining me on stage shortly, I can tell you, they love this stuff. They absolutely love it, and I think they're making really strong headway. So geospatial is a very sort of broad topic. It's a broad focus area. And there's been some fantastic advances, I think, in the technology and the AI over the last couple of years. And that has really shown, or is really starting to improve the implications across the insurance value chain. So whether that's CAT modeling, or risk selection and pricing, fraud, claims management, the application of this technology, it could be really, really game-changing. And at QBE Ventures, we're actually really bullish on the topic of geospatial. We think that in a number of years it's going to be sort of table stakes type technology in the sense of how multiple areas across of the insurance value chain. And not only is there this huge long-term potential, but what's really, really exciting, particularly for teams like us who have a role in a large sort of incumbent organisation where we're trying to innovate, there is massive short-term implications and opportunities with this technology, right? So it's really exciting when you can play with the technology, when you can put it in the hands of team members now, of claims teams, for example, and they can really start to get excited by it. They can see the application of it, and there's uptake and there's use cases right now. And I think that's really exciting. So without further ado, let me introduce our speakers today, and those who will join me on the panel. Reading out their bios and sort of getting to know a little bit more of them on paper before the session, it makes me realise that I've potentially sort of really sort of, what's the word, somewhat underachieved in life, to be entirely honest, when I sort of start to read out these bios. But I'm going to be joined on stage today by Nick Hassam and Rachel Olney. Nick is the founder and chief commercial officer at Reask and is an expert in the application of technology to the global insurance and reinsurance industry, specifically in the field of natural catastrophes, right? So Nick and the team at Reask are really looking forward to try to sort of redefine and reimagine sort of catastrophe and climate risk modelling. So he has over 25 years professional experience working with insurers, working with intermediaries, working with government agencies, both in Australia and across the globe. He holds a Master in Science from the University of London and an MBA from the University of Adelaide. Please put your hands together and welcome Nick. Our second panelist today is Rachel Olney. So Rachel is the CEO and founder of Geosite. Rachel has a Master's in Mechanical Engineering from Stanford University and is currently completing her PhD there. Ironically, the title of her thesis is Innovation in Necessarily Bureaucratic and Hierarchical Organizations, which sounds like sort of a perfect fit for the insurance industry, so we get on really well. But her focus obviously sort of is in somewhere a bit different actually, and has actually been working with US Cyber Command. Rachel is an instructor for technology and national security at Stanford University. She's taught innovation frameworks and standard operating procedures for a number of government agencies and even sort of elite special forces operations in the US military. She was a Forbes 30 Under 30 awardee. She's a Gates Scholar, and she joins us today sort of flying over from California. So please welcome Rachel. Rightio. Now, I think I did a fantastic job at introducing both of you.
Thank you.
I hope you guys
I do charge a fee if you'd like me to follow you around to do that. But what I didn't touch on, obviously, is Geosite and Reask specifically. So, Nick, I'll start with you. Do you want to maybe set the scene a little bit for everyone in the room around what Reask does, sort of its mission and sort of focus?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess to some extent it starts a little bit with my background. My background from a technical perspective is in geospatial analytics, my undergraduate and postgraduate degrees in geospatial analytics, and that's certainly my trade or my technical capability, I guess, as a way of saying it. And really, I guess the relevant part of this conversation is that about 20 years ago in 2003, I joined the insurance industry with the goal really, I guess, of trying to bring some of the skills and capabilities and technologies in geospatial technology into the insurance industry, where I started out in the London market. And over the last 20 years, I've been involved in different parts of insurance, both in Europe and here in Australia and in the US. And really have seen over the course of the last 20 years the evolution of how it is that these types of technologies are used in the insurance industry. And one of the things that I've been heavily involved in is in the field of catastrophe risk modelling or sort of exposure management. And in that time, as you do over the course of your career, you see a lot of things that are wonderful and exciting and interesting, but you also see a lot of the limitations and challenges that the industry faces, and that was certainly true of what I was seeing in the market. And at the time, 6 or 7 years ago, I went out on my own, I was consulting, and I met up with a colleague of mine who was also investigating the use of new technologies, in particular in the application of catastrophe risk modelling to the insurance industry. And we decided to start Reask, I guess with a view to bringing new tools and technologies and data sources to the industry, and really trying, I guess, to really bring to bear those types of capabilities on the market. In terms of what Reask do, we, I guess broadly speaking, build risk models, in particular those associated with the climate, so generally speaking climate risk models. And insurance organisations use our models, I guess, throughout the insurance value chain, so in the underwriting, pricing, risk selection process, through portfolio risk management, and also through the claims process, event response, and responding to catastrophic events. So we have quite a broad scope in terms of the parts of insurance, the segments of insurance within which we work and operate. And yeah, I guess we're really, really excited to sort of build the business up and bring new and novel technologies to bear on the market.
Thanks, mate. Thanks. Rachel.
Yeah. When he was saying we love what we do, he was politely calling us massive geospatial nerds. So we'll try to keep the jargon to a minimum. I was laughing as he said that. He's like, they really love what they do. And what he means by that is we talk his ear off about geospatial. But so my background, as you guys heard, not from insurance, actually from more a technical and government background. And the first applications of our technology were for special operations. If you think about geospatial data, governments were really the first big consumers of spatial data. And so we built Geosite to help people consume all types of spatial data. So Reask, one of our partners, we work with other modeling companies, satellite companies, imagery companies, anything you can imagine. We always say if you can put it on a map, we probably have it on our platform. And then we help integrate that into the core processes of major organizations. That's where my love of bureaucracy comes in handy. Is it's not just about having really amazing data, but it's actually getting it down to that point of decision making and helping people interpret it and integrate it at scale. And so that's what we do.
Awesome. Now, you've worked in the insurance industry a long time.
Yes.
So maybe help set the scene a little bit in the sense of what problems do you see geospatial technology looking to solve? That's sort of the first part. The second part, I guess, then, and follow on from that, is what has stopped the insurance industry to date to really sort of adopt that technology at scale?
Yeah, look, great question. I mean, the way that I see it is I guess, from a very fundamental perspective, is many aspects of insurance, not all aspects of insurance, not all lines of business, but many of them, and probably in some ways most of them, are really a function of location or where something is. So where your house is, where you drive your car, where you work, and the like. So the location of something is inherent and contributes to the likelihood that that will be impacted by, you know, the various events that give rise to claims. So geospatial has a core requirement in the insurance industry in helping organisations to understand where those insured assets or items or people or humans are, and how it is that they interact with the potential perils that might give rise to those claims. So I think throughout the insurance industry, there's a few exceptions in that instance, things like financial lines and the like, but most classes of business insurance will have to consider the concept of where a risk is as to how it is that it can be underwritten and managed through the full insurance value chain. So it sort of is very core to many aspects of that process, and I think that's why it is that it's such an important part. In terms of you know, what organisations can do with it and why it's been difficult to get that into the insurance industry, it's not necessarily just the insurance industry that's had the difficulty of implementing solutions like geospatial technology. To be honest, 25 years ago when I was doing my undergraduate, I was learning about geospatial technology. We were doing things like supervised and unsupervised learning, which some of you may sort of recognise as terminology associated with machine learning, modern machine learning. And we had lots of information, lots of data that enabled us to apply these techniques and methodologies. So both machine learning and data have been around for a very, very long time. But really, the limitation back then, 25 years ago, were very fundamental computational issues of getting access to the computing power to be able to actually process these things. And two things really have happened. One is we have, you know, vastly more computational power available to us, so we can process more information. And secondly, we've had this, what I see as a sort of commoditization of computational power. So nowadays, I can log on to a cloud provider and spin up a machine that, you know, would have represented the entire computational capability of the entire Earth 5 or 10 years ago. So that growth in the very core technologies has enabled organisations to now start to be able to consume this information a great deal more. I think at this point in time, what we now find is that we have a bit of a leap that we need to make, and that is how we get these very complex technical solutions into usable environments and usable platforms to actually be able to, to be able to bring that technology to bear. And that's where we really see the combination of solutions like ours in terms of the data and products that we provide to our clients, and platforms like Geosite, which help and enable organisations to really consume that information.
And what's your take on that? So someone is new to insurance.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, I always reassure carriers and folks when we work with them, I'm like, trust me, this is not the only industry that is struggling with using new data. Fun fact for everybody here who doesn't, you know, nerd out about geospatial all the time, Comcast, which is, you know, a massive telecommunications company, they have physical paper map rooms. And a lot of their infrastructure and their understanding of where their infrastructure is on physical paper maps that they unroll and scan. Right, so geospatial is a very nascent field, so it's already really hard to absorb new data, you know, at scale. But now you're doing that with something as complex as, you know, the models that, you know, all of the new climate modeling companies, flood modeling, fire, you know, et cetera, are creating. And on top of modeled data, you also have observed data. So you'll have, you know, imagery coming in live of a flood that's going on or a fire that's going on, and you have all this information. And, you know, one of the things that, and the reason that I started Geosite and really love what we do, is the most obvious thing about all of it, which is geospatial data is highly geographically tied. And so a model that is very performant in Southern Australia isn't going to work as well in Florida unless it's retrained for that region, for the dynamics of that region. And so, you know, we end up working with providers for different geographies and different data sets, and then mixing and matching those for specific problems. And I think, you know, our team has a large set of experts around geospatial data, so we can, be talking to somebody and be like, oh, this kind of SAR works for this, while this kind of SAR, synthetic aperture radar, it's a type of satellite that uses radar. There are differences in each of the sensors on each of the platforms. And then, here's this kind of flooding model versus that kind of flooding model. And here's where you want to use extent versus depth. And just the nuances of the technology and even the terminology is really difficult and specific. And when you're doing insurance, and not to disagree with Sam on the math, like I love math. I've totally loved the insurance industry because it's very math driven compared to governments, which can be a little bit subjective about what the goal is. You can just show, here is the math, here are the locations we've gone through, we've specifically found them, we've run the best models against that data, and we can see immediately, the outputs of that information and get things done right away. And so I think the hardest part has been, a lot of carriers and other folks in the insurance industry want to find a silver bullet for geospatial. They're like, we want just a model that will work because all of our systems are set up for us really just to rely on one model or maybe two models, but not tons of inputs of data. So I think the breadth of choice in both modeled and observed spatial data has made it a really, really tough challenge.
And so let's keep that going. So I think it'd be great to let's make it sort of practical or real for everyone. So maybe if we can have, or like an example, and you can obviously use QBE if you like, or anyone else, like what's an example of where you're working with carriers, reinsurers, brokers, whoever that may be now? Sort of what are the use cases? What's the sort of the value that you're seeing sort of being driven? I'll start with Rachel.
Yeah, we were prepping for this panel and we were like, yes, we have like a slam dunk on stage because we have like an exact use case with all three of us, and we were all able to give it the thumbs up, So
I was trying to make it look not scripted,
sorry.
but that's all right.
I'm too excited, That was like the nerd, not CEO answer. Like, no, guys, we actually already figured this out. But with what Nick was talking about earlier about touching the whole value chain, we've seen that, of course. And for, I think, a lot of insurance companies, figuring out where to start can be very difficult. And we specifically, around natural catastrophes, and if you're looking at catastrophe data, that can be a really nice starting point because you have a specific event, you have a discrete region, you can run kind of a very specific project, and then go backwards and expand from there. So specifically around Hurricane Ian, we were able to run a really large program in parallel to look at everything from reserving to claims handling, and then eventually also going all the way back to here were the models, here were the property characteristics, here's all the data that was available before the storm. Here's what we could have known before we even had a natural catastrophe, and then use that to inform all the way back to pricing and new product development and all of those things, but using a discrete event where you can just look at the data and you can see that leveraging all these new data sources is helpful, was what we actually ended up doing with QBE. And then from there, you can start to find all the areas that you could have used data from before. But I think a lot of times starting with, an event where you can just say, we will have actual claims data, we can actually compare what ended up happening with what would have been available. And we did that along with, we had Reask data there, and we were able to show that alongside, predicted versus actuals, and it was very, very helpful.
Anything to add?
Yeah, look, I think sometimes people forget that the product of insurance is a claim. Really, you're paying or buying essentially the right to a future claim, and often, I guess the rubber hits the road when an event of some description happens. And for us, well, certainly here in Australia, this year I guess it's floods. A few years ago it was bushfire, and before that tropical cyclone. So whenever these events happen, it's a very obvious sort of use case, but it is somewhat responsive. So we forget about Black Saturday, which happened in 2009, and was one of the most tragic and devastating events. But no doubt, when there's another bushfire in the coming years, that will be the focus of attention. And I think that is a great way of sort of coming into this. So we We spend a lot of time responding to these types of events all around the world. We have sort of global coverage in terms of where it is that we look at these types of events. Last year, for example, in the Northern Hemisphere and in the Atlantic was a very busy season, including Hurricane Ian, which is part of the work that we've been doing in combination with Geosite and QBE. It will almost certainly end up being one of the largest insured losses of all times. It's certainly coming along that way. And I think that really sharpens people's attention, that particular event. And if it doesn't, probably the reinsurance rates that you're paying at the moment would focus that attention even more. So I think that event response process is great to sort of bring attention to things. But exactly as Rachel said, bringing it back up the food chain and saying, well, how do we actually price and select these risks in the first instance that has led to this process of the claims that we're paying now, and how can we improve that process and get that cycle of learning going through the entire insurance chain?
Yeah, I completely agree, and I sort of said at the beginning, there's massive long-term potential for that. I know one of the, sort of the key topics is how can we get more sort of data around climate risk, catastrophe exposure. How can we get that integrate into sort of workbenches, integrate into sort of underwriting platforms? How can we bring that insight a lot earlier on in the process to help inform decision making, right? And not just inform decision making, but also in some instances actually start to work with our customers who may be heavily exposed, right? Where there may be some almost, from a price perspective, almost a detrimental effect to them of knowing more. How can we work with them to improve risk, right? How can we work with them to improve their understanding of exposure? How can we introduce more transparency into the process and sort of work with them? And I think that's the long-term goal, but sort of to your point around the claims and sort of the near stuff, I mean, as you said, it's like it's a never-ending sort of cycle of natural catastrophes that's ongoing. I hadn't appreciated just the process an insurance company has to go through to sort of start to understand the impact of that event, right? Not only on customers and the financials, whatever that might be. And it's also showed me just how, in some ways, archaic it is, that process, right? And not only in the terms of the time it takes to get it, the guesswork involved, the assumptions that are made, how a relatively sort of, I'm going to say simple, it's not a simple technology, but it's certainly sort of bringing that insight in can allow us to sort of, very quickly make much more sort of targeted decisions. So fast forward 5 years or sort of, I think the last couple of years, certainly my understanding, I'm not a nerd in this space, but my understanding from Alex and some of our team is that the advancements, particularly in the AI, have been huge. You can task a satellite now, you can do various things to sort of support this. What does the next sort of 5 years look like, right? Where are we going to go here? Is it going to be table stakes? Is it not? Rachel, I'll start with you.
Yeah. I think, as Nick expanded on that and, your comments, I was thinking about how it's not just about the scale and the amount of data, but the accuracy is really quite astounding using a lot of these tools for refining it. An example I like to use is even just knowing exactly where a, insured property is, like that level of granularity, people will be like, oh no, we have all these very accurate lat longs, and none of those actually align with the building footprints. So even if you have more accurate flooding data or fire data or different peril maps, if that's not aligned with your understanding of where your portfolio is, the entire data set ends up skewed. So when I think about the next 5 years, what I get really excited about is I think the accuracy along all of these different variables is going to continue increasing. Everything from the mundane, geocoding part of it, finding the actual polygons on the surface of the earth that you care about, all the way through the models and the fine tuning of those models for different areas and different kinds of different flavors of perils for each of those areas. And then our understanding of how those interconnect. In my head, I'm always thinking about, the table essentially of you have all these different exposures, you have all these different perils, you have all these different actions that you can take to reduce risk along all of those. And so how do you use that data to inform your customers and really have a extremely accurate but scalable understanding of your portfolio? So instead of having to do a study over just one geography or one subset of the portfolio to have an understanding of the entire portfolio, actually having that level of accuracy at scale is going to become more and more possible because of these models. And it's not just, individual studies of specific areas. And so I think of it as like a digital twin, right, for the Earth, like actually understanding like what is going on with the climate, what is going on with these properties, what is it that's making them risky, and can we help reduce that? And the bureaucratic part of me gets excited about integrating it into these core systems. So I think one of the biggest mistakes of the geospatial industry, so I have a very different talk, right, when I go talk to the geospatial nerds, and it's all about like, hey guys, you think people are super excited about your geotiff, and they're not. Like, trust me, they're not. They really just are trying to get an answer from this information. And so the thing I get excited about is watching the insurance industry really start to adopt this data and plug it into core systems. So at Geosite, we made it a priority to integrate with policy admin systems. And we launched our full integration with Socotra last year, that anybody using Socotra, if they type in an address, it hits our system and it'll pull from a massive suite of geospatial sources to pull it directly into underwriting flows, workflows, and directly into claims workflows. And we're starting to do that with more and more of these systems. So to me, it's the data is exciting, but also the actual integrations and the ability for people who don't understand geospatial data to use that data. That's where I start to nerd out, because I get very excited about all of our partners and the cool things they're doing, and then all the applications for that data once we can actually translate it.
Yeah, look, fascinating ideas, and I wholeheartedly agree with those. If you can't actually, enable people to utilise the technology and the outcomes of all of these very complex scientific and technological process, there's almost no point to doing it in the first place. So that really is key. I think from our perspective, in particular in terms of artificial intelligence, two key areas that we're very focused on in terms of developing our capabilities and products. One is in forecasting, so the ability to look forward, and we do that on a number of different temporal resolutions. We look forward in the very near future, so what's happening in this upcoming season with regards to tropical cyclone or bushfires, or the potential for rainfall and flooding and so on. And we know that our capabilities in terms of predicting and the expectation of frequency and severity of these types of events at this point in time is very good. That's going to improve over time as we collect more data and improve those algorithms to really understand that better. And that's not only just sort of in the very near future, but also in the very distant future, where we have quite obviously this very existential challenge of an evolving climate that's really going to impact this industry and I guess society as a whole. So that's one area that we're working on. I think the other is how it is that this evolving climate is interacting between different types of hazards and perils. So we have a bit of a focus on tropical cyclone at the moment, but we're developing solutions around bushfire. And the way in which those hazards interplay amongst one another and with other perils on an annual basis or on a long-term basis is something that tools like artificial intelligence are very, very good at trying to understand and learn patterns and to give us indicators as to how it is that those things might be operating. So we might be able to say in the future that in this season we're going to have a quiet tropical cyclone season, but a very active bushfire season, or perhaps both of them will be benign, or perhaps both of them will be busy. So I think those are the types of areas that artificial intelligence in particular is very well adapted to, and that's where we'll see a lot of the development in the coming years. But as Rachel said, if you can't sort of engage those insights with the people who actually make the decisions within whatever industry you're working in, but in particular in insurance, there's not much use to creating those insights if people can't access it and actually practically and pragmatically implement those insights.
Thank you. We're out of time. Hopefully that was enough to whet everyone's appetite around the potential of the technology. There's a long way to go, but there's also huge sort of short and long term opportunities now for this technology to really make a difference across the value chain and sort of start to address some climate risk. So if you can please join me in thanking Rachel and Nick for the panel.